it'll work. But we're good. Tell them we're good. We're good. Move it out of the way so you guys can see. Can you guys see the screen there? Can everyone see the screen there? Whoa. My technology department. You can see how sophisticated the technology is. You got duct tape involved. It's always good, right?
Works in NASCAR.
Works in NASCAR. All right, guys, we'll get the show on the road. Lee, I don't know if you have a sign-in sheet. If you do, you can pass that around. So just by way of introduction and orientation of what we got going on, this is a family group tonight. And I think you guys are here every Monday. This is my first time here. I'll introduce myself in a second. So we do a lot of these family groups through Favor Greenville, and people do them differently. So just some general kind of like guidelines. If you're here and you're in recovery, that's perfectly fine. But if you share from the perspective to help the family. Remember, this is about how do families wrap their mind around this strange thing called addiction and all the behaviors that go along with it, that kind of thing. And at the end, we can talk about announcement. There are other meetings, and there are all recovery meetings and things like that going along here in this same spot. And if you're here for a PTA meeting or something, you're in the wrong room. So when I first started going to recovery meetings, that would happen. You would wander into the wrong room, and you'd be like, "Hey, is this an AA meeting? Not for me or anything, but I'm just here for a survey." No, it's PTA. Okay. Because you never knew where you were going. Because that's how it was for me. I never knew where I was going. And weirdly, it was one of the reasons why I stayed away. Not knowing exactly how to do it, and being embarrassed and being ashamed. And the last thing I wanted to do was walk in a place and start asking questions about addiction. And it was overwhelming. And unfortunately, that's the experience for most folks, statistically speaking, who are dealing with this. Fortunately, some of us, we get it. Some people get through that process, do what they need to do, they find their way. But we're of the opinion the family has to become incredibly informed when dealing with this issue, because it doesn't go away. I really wish it was a matter of your loved one going to a rehab and getting dipped in the waters of recovery and coming back and living happily ever after. But we know that that's not the case. And so becoming ultra informed on what you're dealing with, just straight from like a factual standpoint, we believe can help. And that's the purpose of me being here. I'll be here the first Monday of every month. And it'll be a little bit of a different format. I'll lecture the whole entire time, but take questions and kind of go through it. So if you have anything on your mind, if you have a burning desire, you have something that you're dealing with, we can certainly cover that as we go through the presentation. A little bit about me. I'm the CEO of Favor Greenville. This is kind of who I am professionally. I've spent the majority of my career working in pretty traditional places, things like rehabs and community mental health, private practice. I've been an interventionist. I've been at Favor Greenville for 5 years. This is my 6th year there. Favor Greenville is a recovery center focused on people in recovery, delivering the service. We call it coaching. And this is one of the things we do, educational sessions, outreach sessions to families. I'm also a person of long-term recovery myself. So, I had an alcohol issue way before pills kind of came on board. But in 1999, I was in a car accident. I lived in Western Pennsylvania, and I was rear-ended at a red light. Walked out of the emergency room that day with 120 Darvocet, and it was kind of over. And within 18 months, I knew my way around a party. I knew my way around substances, but I had never run into anything like that. And maybe in a weird way, it's a blessing in disguise, because I think I probably would have drank for a lot longer. Drinking is socially acceptable. Drinking is the #1 destroyer, though. I don't know if you know that or not, but 88,000 people die every year as a direct result of chronic alcohol misuse. We hear a lot more about overdoses. We hear a lot more about those problems, but alcohol you cannot forget. And that's because what? It's legal, it's socially acceptable, it's at every event, it's on every commercial. And it's always like the beautiful people too on the commercials. You ever notice that with alcohol commercials? It's never the guy. They don't ever have a commercial that winds up with the dude thrown up in the corner. It's always like, and it never worked like that for me, what you see on those commercials. Very, very unrealistic, guys. So So tonight I'm going to go through some basic stuff around what is substance use disorder, what is addiction, what can the family do. Please stop and ask questions and get clarification in any area at any point. We can camp out for a minute and talk a little bit more about it. So I want to go through a couple things real early on, and I don't make an assumption about the group, but I do know for sure in Greenville and in Spartanburg, where I'm doing these groups, we got a lot of parents showing up. A lot of parents and grandparents, to tell you the truth, showing up because they're dealing with these issues with kids. And so I want to talk real quick before I get into it about some of the special things related to dealing with this issue if you're coming at it from a parenting standpoint. Because we know for sure if you're coming at it from a parenting standpoint versus Rich is upset because his wife is using, or my wife is upset because I'm using. With a parenting issue, you got to talk to the other parent who's involved. You got to talk to the other significant person in your loved one's life. And so right off the jump, we need to kind of talk through that part and see and encourage people to have these difficult conversations. Because a lot of times where addiction is concerned, one person takes care of it. There'll be like a point person in the family, sort of running the show, making the calls, trying to find the rehabs, doing all the work. And then other people have different opinions on what's going on, and that's just like fractured system, right? And that's not, when it comes to change, that's probably not going to work. Because why? Why would that not work? Splitting behaviors, going to people, getting the answer you want, finding somebody who's going to kind of like give you the money, keep you going, that kind of stuff. And it can get really, really ugly. I believe it can get really, really ugly where any healthcare issue is concerned. Like one of the things with parents, if you're dealing with a healthcare issue with a kid, it's going to push you to the maximum. It's going to, you're already going to be walking around at an 8 all day. And it's going to take what, like one wrong word, one wrong comment to just blow this thing up. So the idea of giving each other a break and understanding, like the way that we design it is with this pyramid, because we spend a lot of time talking about the top of the pyramid. And the top of the pyramid is all the stuff like, should we kick them out? Should we not kick them out? What's the curfew? How are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle that? Should we give them money? Should we not give them money? We spend a lot of time talking about that. And that is ultimately where you need to wind up. But you also got to remember that if you're not careful, you'll start questioning whether or not you like each other anymore, or whether or not you actually think that your husband or your wife has the best interest of the kid in mind. This has been one of the common things that you'll see come up. Because maybe you don't agree with decisions they made along the way, or maybe you don't agree with how they're handling it. And if you think this is going on, all kinds of sideways stuff is going to come out. You're not going to actually solve the problem. You're going to wind up saying insulting things to one another. The discussion on what the boundaries should be it's not going to be a discussion on boundaries. It's going to be an argument about 1973 when you left the lid off the toothpaste. That's sort of a joke, guys. You just lose focus on and again, I don't blame anybody for this. I've gone through this. Sherry and I were talking before the meeting. My 6-year-old son, this past summer, well, he was 5 at the time. I mean, he nearly died. He was in the hospital for 4 days in a drug-induced coma because his respiratory system shut down. And I was jacked up. I was at a 9.5 on a scale of 1 to 10 all day, every day. And it didn't take much for my wife and I to degenerate into just a straight-up argument and a straight-up screaming match, because we were both so frustrated. We were both so worried. So you got to give each other a break, and you got to really, really be mindful of how to communicate around this, guys. There's nothing easy. And I think it's even harder where substance use is concerned. Even than what I was dealing with, believe it or not, because at least with my son, I knew he was getting treatment. I could see him right in front of me. But when you're dealing with addiction, what's it like? The person's out there running around. You might not even know where they're at. You don't know whether they're getting the best help they can get. It's not like some of these other diseases. Also, nobody brings you a casserole whenever your child's diagnosed with addiction. If your child was diagnosed with cancer, there'd be a bunch of people at the door. You'd be on the prayer card list. But with addiction, what's it like? I don't know if I want anyone to know. We're not going to talk about that. Do you guys see how the tension and the stress and the anxiety just raises and raises? And many times it'll be the people closest to you. They're the only ones you can talk to. So be kind to each other. That's the first piece of advice. Be kind to each other. and understand nobody does this perfect. Parenting in general, nobody does perfect, but certainly nobody does addiction perfect. It's one step forward, two steps back. It's like kind of looking your way through the minefield, doing the best you can. All right? So I wanted to talk about that. The other thing is in the middle it talks about taking a rest every once in a while. Some people in here have been dealing with this for a bunch of years, and it'll wear you out. It'll wear you out. It'll exhaust you. And do you have any way built in where you get to take a rest? Maybe, and it's very counterintuitive if you're in the middle of a crisis or you're dealing with a substance use issue with a kid to like just go away and try to recharge your batteries. But you're not, you are a human being too. They have an issue. You're watching them unravel in front of you. They have an issue. They're putting these things in their body that could kill them. Absolutely. It's happening over and over. But you're a person too. And you're not superhuman. So can you take time to rest? Can you take time to actually regroup? Do you have anyone else that you can get involved to help you all out? You know, if grandparents, friends. You have to find people that are safe, though. You can't find people who are judgmental. You cannot talk to anybody on the phone or otherwise that starts the sentence off with, if that was my kid, I would. You know what I'm talking about? Fill in the blank. I'd kick him out. If that was my kid, boy, I tell you what, he'd never let him talk to me like that. If that was my kid, he'd never talk to me like that. That's just not true. That's not true. They probably would let their kid talk to them like that. You know, and many times I've been on the other end with a person who was what I like to call like an armchair perfect parent. I don't know if you know anyone like that. And I've talked to them about situations with their kids, and they've had a reason why they shouldn't kick them out. No, you don't understand, Rich. It's different. He's left-handed. So I struggle with people who kind of like want to sit back and in judgment on other people who are dealing with this issue. I don't think that serves any purpose. I'm not sure if they're doing it because they're defensive and they're saying that to kind of make themselves feel better. I just don't understand. You don't want to deal with that though if you're dealing with this issue. You don't need anybody who's going to add to your plate. You want people who are going to take it away. You want people who are going to come with only positive suggestions, practical advice. Does that make sense? You don't need to get yourself in a tutorial with somebody. And the worst thing is, do not listen to anyone who doesn't have kids themselves. There's a special place in hell for those people. I mean, don't give me advice if you haven't walked in my shoes around these issues. I will let you know I have 7 kids, so you can listen to me. I have a graduate degree in having kids. It's a long story. It's a long story. Yeah. Here's the other thing before we get going, and this is just as important, and this applies to anybody, whether it's spouses or whatever the situation is. You got yourself and you got your relationship with your loved one. Let's just pretend it's parents to child. You know, you got mom and dad, and you have your relationship, and maybe it's a young adult child. You may not be the most important person in that person's life anymore. There might be a girlfriend involved, there might be a boyfriend involved, a husband or wife. You have to also start identifying who else needs to be included in this. And if you look at this graphic, in the middle, pretend that's your loved one. They're sitting there, and you got to start asking yourselves, who's closest to my loved one? And who else do we need to get in this room to start learning about this? I don't know if you guys can relate to that or not, but you have a lot of situations where you only have so much influence over the person because other people, it's just part of growing up, right? Other people become more important. Other people their opinion becomes more important. Other people may be engaging and kind of enabling. So who else do you need to get involved, and how do you get them involved? This is huge. If you're trying to kind of affect change, or your goal is to sort of like try to push your loved one and nudge them toward recovery, asking yourself this question can be very, very helpful. It's not easy, though, to get people to come to rooms like this. It's not easy to get people to come to rooms. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts on that particular dynamic? Or can anyone relate to that? If not, that's okay.
Definitely.
You can? Yeah.
Son's girlfriends or son's mother of his child, the whole other family. I mean, the last text that I saw from her is, Mitch, you got to quit using your addiction as a crutch.
Yeah.
And trying to get somebody like that to listen to this stuff is very difficult.
Oh, Oh, it is, and it's almost like you have to do an intervention on them to get them into rooms like this. So you got to find creative ways to get the information to them. One of the reasons why we put it on Facebook is we're hoping people will check it out that won't come to groups like this, because we know that many people won't. But they got to understand what's happening. People have to understand what's happening, and you can be on an island just screaming, saying, "Here, we got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this." And it just takes that crack in the armor. It takes that other kind of message that's going out. The way that we suggest is you do try to get them to come to group. That would kind of be like the first choice. And then if not, it's just information. Watch these videos or read a book or whatever it may be and learn about this thing being a brain disease. Would anyone else want to comment on this dynamic?
Well, the ones that are most significant is the boyfriend that is a drug addict.
So you get the complications around whether or not that person is using, right? And whether or not they're like, what do you want to call it? Like partners in crime, that kind of thing. I'm going to talk about interventions in a minute, and I will tell you that I've done many interventions, and I've had the person who's actively using with me in interventions on the person who we're trying to get in treatment. We've had to do work up front. We've had to talk to the person on the phone and say, this isn't going to go well. She's going to die. This isn't going to go well. And sometimes what I've noticed is you're able to appeal to that person's better judgment. It's almost like they care more about somebody else than they do themselves. In a very strange way, guys. Very hard to understand that.
And then the other two factors would be your two children who are way too young to, those are most
Yeah.
important in their life.
Yeah.
Too young to do anything with or not.
And when you look at that, you may come up with no one else. Like, it's just, we're here, the people that I need to have here, that I can realistically have are here. This would also be if it was obvious stuff. Like, I can give you an example. Even in my life, what was obvious was, for a long time, I didn't get recovery till I was about 29. And for a long time, I would run to my mom's house after my wife would boot me out. And I would get emotional validation from my mom. She's overreacting, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see how that, like, my mom had to get in this mix in order for anything to change? That's just an example. And if you can't do anything, you can't do anything. You're just starting to think about it. You're starting to think, is there anyone else that could help? Now, if you start running through just options, and this is just a framework, guys. It doesn't fit everyone perfectly. It's just sort of like, what can we do? That's a very common question. And I'm going to go through these because they're hard to see, but depending on where you're at in this process, there are basically 5 or 6 different options you have. The easiest option, or the option that requires the least amount of drama, is to do nothing different than what you've been doing and start learning about it. You guys may be beyond that. You may feel like you already know what you're dealing with, but we got to admit that for some folks, they're not even sure what's happening, and really what you need to do is come to a few more of these groups and start to learn about what's going down. So that we have to acknowledge that's one option. The second option would be for you guys to start changing your response to your loved one. You're not having an intervention yet. You're not having any kind of conversation. You're just changing your response. And you're letting them know that you're coming to this group. And you're starting to set different boundaries. But maybe they're not the most hardcore boundaries. We call this practice. You start to practice saying no. It's very hard. Most of the time, you guys know when you should say no. It's just super difficult to do. Because why? Because it's so dangerous. And you have this tape playing in your mind on where this is going to wind up if you throw the hammer down. So what you have to do is you have to, instead of jumping in the pool full of cold water, maybe you have to put your toe in there, and then you have to put your foot in there, and you have to practice not giving money before you jump to, you're going to have to leave my house. Do you guys get that? You got to get comfortable with the uncomfortability of your loved one kind of like going off on you and just storming out and not coming back, and all the wild things that'll run through your mind in those situations. I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but you can go to some dark places when that happens. So you have to try to get comfortable with that to a certain degree. How are we going to deal with that if we ask him to leave? Are we really going to be able to keep the door locked and not let him back in? So you can start with those type of things, and we'll talk more as we go through. You could literally even start with changing the way you respond to the situation. Now, what we know about any family is that people fall into roles and they fall into scripts, and it's very predictable about how these things go down. If you were to go home and reflect on the situations, you probably find out that everybody's kind of falls into their own space. So like for us, how it worked was I would go periods of time with everything going okay, then it would hit the fan and my wife would she had the same script. I could have set it for her. Yes, I know, I can't do this anymore. I understand. This has to be the last time. Okay, I'm leaving now. Do you get that? Like but it was high drama, high chaos. My wife started to attend Al-Anon meetings. With my mom, I refer to that as the unholy alliance. Because that's the beginning of the end, right? Because they're going to go and they're going to learn about things. And my wife started to respond differently to me. Before any of the intervention went down, before anything else happened, the response was different. She wouldn't yell at me. I remember getting in a car accident with my kids. I'd taken a handful of pills. I had 3 kids. Our situation is such that we have 3 adult children. Then we kind of like were in a situation where reproduction was not possible. Okay, we had to reconcile some things. And we came back and we have 4 more young children. So we reconciled, man. There's different definitions of reconciliation. And so these were my 3 older kids that were in the car at the time. This is 19 years ago. And I had been on a bunch of pills already. I don't think I was drinking. I think it was mainly just pills. And I basically nodded out and bumped somebody in front of me. Not a bad accident, but it was enough to damage the car and freak my wife out. And so, this is a situation where typically it would hit the fan. And what happened was we were going to a New Year's Eve party, and I went and I got even worse at the New Year's Eve party. And again, we got in the van the next day to drive back to Pittsburgh. We were outside. We were at up by the ski slopes. And so I just was prepared for it. And I got to be honest with you, I had it. It was almost like I wanted it, because I was comfortable in that yelling, in that conflict, and in that chaos. And she would not argue with me. She would not say anything. And as true as I'm standing here, guys, I remember being like, uh-oh, something's up. Like, this is weird. And I remember trying to like take her role in the argument. Because if she wasn't going to argue with me, I was going to argue with myself. Because somebody has got to be mad about this. But she just goes and she does her thing. And what do you think that does? That starts to change. It's not predictable. It doesn't make any sense, and it gets me reflecting and nervous and jammed up about the situation, which is good. You want your loved one to be like tense about using. If they're comfortable in their using, even if it's total chaos, guys, we can be comfortable in it. Does that make sense? Conflict, screaming, yelling, fighting, storming out, punching holes in drywall. That's where we live, man. That's where we live, and even though it's completely dysfunctional, it still is predictable. And we don't think twice when we go out the door after one of those fights. We just go get what we got to get. We would freak out if it was like, I really don't think you should leave, honey. I love you more than life itself, and I'm worried about you, but I can't stop you, and we're not going to even say anything. Talk about ruining a person's night. It's really hard to do, though. It's very, very hard to do because it's real counterintuitive. And you're going to apply this advice to your particular situation. There's no one way to do that. You actually might have to do the opposite and ratchet it up a little bit. Sometimes the other extreme is what? Avoidance. I don't want to say anything. I'm going to ignore this. In that case, you might want to ratchet it up. But you're thinking, like, how can I start changing something, anything at all, around this issue? Does that make sense? You're trying to change the script. The third column is you can have a meeting. And this is if you have somebody else who can help you out. And it doesn't have to be an intervention. And it doesn't have to be dramatic. And it doesn't have to be like what you see on TV. It doesn't even have to involve any kind of threats or anything like that. It doesn't have to involve ultimatums. It can literally just be, hey, we want to talk to you. We're worried. What's going down? Have you thought about getting back in and getting some help or anything like that? I don't know about the details. Again, the details are very, very individualized. But we just call that a meeting. We don't call that an intervention. One notch above that is an intervention. And what's the difference between a meeting and an intervention? An intervention, by definition, involves these things called bottom lines. And I don't know if anybody's ever been in in an intervention, but the bottom lines are the things that usually you write a letter, and at the end it says, if you don't do XYZ, ABC is going to happen. And you can't go there unless you're 100% sure that you can do ABC. One of the problems we've had with interventions, all our services are free. Everything that Favor Greenville does is free. Everything that Favor Anderson does is free. But what we've noticed is that people change their mind around interventions because they can't actually follow through on what they were going to say. Because it's usually some pretty heavy duty stuff. People do interventions whenever they're just so worried or so worn out they can't take it anymore. But it is an option. It is an option. We don't do the actual like bottom line interventions. We refer out for those because we just simply don't have the manpower for that right now. We're working on that. Those, when you do those right, it takes some people. You got to get the person to treatment. You follow me? It's not a meeting. On the other hand, is just to get something going. An intervention is let's do this. Let's get this done. They're never like they are on TV, though, guys. That show is awful. That show is horrible. It exploits people who are addicted. You know, I'm talking about A&E intervention. And secondly, it's just not how it works. Like, the interventions are not just dramatic enough, but always successful. Have you noticed that? They storm out, and then the superstar interventionist follows them down the road, smokes a cigarette with them, and they fly to Panama and live happily ever after. It doesn't go down like that. Most of the time, when people will go with sort of like a whimper, or they will just simply say things like, "I'm not going. I'll think about this," and they'll try to put the process off. Occasionally, it'll get crazy, but that's not the norm. But you can do an intervention, and we can help, and some of the coaches here can help make arrangements around that if that's what you're looking for. If you feel like you've reached that level. And then the final column is, I'm sorry, I missed a column around boundaries. So one column up after the meeting, let's pretend you have the meeting and you're talking to them. That the next step would be to start implementing some of the boundaries that maybe were discussed in the meeting, but it's not as important as the intervention because you didn't put it down in writing and you didn't go on the record with it. I know this sounds like it's semantics, but I'm telling you, there's nothing worse than doing an intervention and saying that Rich is going to have to leave if he doesn't go to rehab and then not doing it. It's totally different if you're just having a conversation and you're saying things like, "We're not sure if we're going to let you keep this car if you're going to keep doing that. We're not sure what to do with that. We're trying to figure it out." It gives you wiggle room. Do you see that? Whereas an intervention doesn't really give you wiggle room. It's like one or the other. But you could start to work on those boundaries. You could take the car. You could stop paying the rent, whatever it may be. And then the final column is, a lot of you have heard this stuff. This is kind of some of the classic advice, is to just detach from the situation. Kind of like cut off contact. We don't recommend that. That's not our default. That's not kind of who we are and what we believe. But this is the advice that some people would give. You're like, don't even give them a bologna sandwich, right? Like as if anybody wants a bologna sandwich. Even in addiction, you don't want a bologna sandwich. I don't know, maybe you do. But that's the advice of literally out the door, out of sight, out of mind. We're not having anything to do with you. We don't recommend that, but I do put it up here because sometimes it is the only thing left to do, and usually it's after a long journey. Sometimes people are just so worn out. There's like two circumstances. One is it's just been going on so long, and the second is the person is dangerous or stealing your property or something like that. And those are kind of like the options, guys, that you start to work through this. And again, there's nothing comfortable about this. But you start to work through it. You start to say, where are we in this process and what are we going to work on? So that you feel like you got a plan. You feel like you have something. Now, I'm going to talk as we go through about this idea of taking care of yourself. Taking care of yourself is taking care of your own stress. And we recommend that too, but I've done so many of these family groups and I've worked with so many families that I know many families don't want to hear take care of yourself. You know, you're sick too. I'm not down, I get that. Taking care of yourself, I'm going to give you great stress management advice before this night's out. But you can also start with a roadmap where it might help you feel a little bit better about it. And then when it's time for you to take care of yourself, you'll feel like I've done every single thing I can. And now I'm a little bit at peace, even if this ends badly. Do you get where I'm coming from? It's kind of like this is our version of the long-term recovery plan for families to implement. The way that this would work in terms of how we do it with favor would be, you can go home and you can try things tonight. You don't have to have a professional with you. That's the other thing. You don't have to have somebody with you who's going to tell you how to do this. You have more power than any of us. They've done studies. The family, in terms of like emotional leverage, has about 8 times more influence than your average therapist. Even when it's estranged, even when it's not going well. So you don't have to have somebody with you to go home tonight and kind of like have a meeting. I'm going to talk about some suggestions around having the meeting, but you can start that conversation. You just don't want to start it in a confrontational way. Does everyone get that? Here's the one rule. I guess 2 rules. It's not about like what you did wrong to the person. It's about how you feel. And you're saying things like, I just can't handle this anymore. Can we please sit down and talk about this? You know, I love you too much to watch you self-destruct. Whereas we know what happens with addiction is what? It always ends up into this like clash of the titans. And you're never going to win that, guys. You're never going to win that argument. Every single night I went to bed and said, I'm not doing that again tomorrow. I want you to know that. And I was not a weak-willed person. I was not a person who was undisciplined. I was not a person who was lazy. I was not a person who wasn't parented right. It literally took control of me. My brain changed. And then by 9 o'clock the next morning, or when my feet hit the ground, I was obsessed with it, and I went and got it. And all the other stuff that happened, right? And all the other things that people said, they said, but I was still going to get it. And the people around me couldn't understand that. They had no clue what to call it or what it was and why is he doing that. And so we would always degenerate into a fight that ended with, or at some point in time had the phrase, you need help in it. You know what I'm talking about? And then my response to you need help was genius. My response to my mom telling me you need help was, you need help! And then we got into this like kind of like weird schoolboy, I know you are, but what am I? Kind of thing. Right? And it never changed, it never changed, it never changed because it was an unwinnable debate. Do you guys get that? It was absolutely unwinnable. Parents cannot. First of all, you have limited control over the outcome, guys. It's like it's going to be the person themselves who's going to start to take some steps. But you certainly aren't going to be able to say anything or do anything or debate the person into the process. And I'm going to show you why, because it's literally a brain change, guys. Just some things that we advise around having these conversations. When you're considering what to do, like whether or not we should like throw down a hard boundary or whether or not we should ask the person to leave, some of the factors that you'll hear that come up consistently, the age of the person has something to do with it. The way you handle a 48-year-old tends to be different than an 18-year-old. How long you've been dealing with it, the longer you've been dealing with it, the more frustrated you're going to be, and you're probably closer to detachment. Does that make sense? You've got to honor your own feelings, and if you're just feeling like I can't take this anymore, that is perfectly fine, and you can step off. You do not have to stay on that. The behavior of the person influences it. So what I mean by that is that some people are just kind of calmer about it. They're like charming about the addiction. They kind of lie. They sort of like try to move and duck and they try to stay out of mom and dad's radar or wives' radar, that kind of thing. Other people are just blatant. They're so out of control, it's in your face, and maybe they're stealing things. Maybe there's property damage. That will all kind of come into play. And then, your history with this will also come into play. One of the things that gets in the way, though, is fear, and the other thing is guilt. So I want to talk about those for a minute. So we know that the what to do, like a lot of times a person will know what to do, but they can't follow through on the conversation that needs to occur. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, where you felt like, we should say no to this, or we should have this conversation. They can't live in the basement anymore because he's actively using, but you can't seem to pull yourself into it. When you talk to folks, this would be more like when you're talking to people in smaller settings, like one-on-one and stuff. You hear that like guilt and fear are two of the biggest themes that come through as to why people don't pull the trigger on things. And so if I want to like encourage you to be thinking these things through when it comes. Let's just start with the emotion of guilt, the experience of guilt. So something happens with your loved one. Maybe you just find out about this, or maybe they were doing good and all of a sudden they stopped coming home, or maybe things are missing at your house. But there's something happening and something needs to be confronted. You guys get the scenario? But the consequence. The event happens, and the C is you avoid it. You don't say anything. Or maybe you say something, but you don't really say anything. Or maybe you say something, get the answer that you want, and accept it, even though you know that that's not true. That's mine. You guys know what I'm talking about? I tried to address it. That's all under this thing called avoidance. So the bottom line is it happens, and you avoid, and the reason you avoid is the B, the belief about what might happen. I feel bad and guilty. I didn't do enough. If I would have just put him into that extra play group, or if I would have, you know what I mean? Or if I would have kept him away from that friend, or if we would have noticed it earlier, man, we should have known this was happening. I should have known this was happening. Or maybe you let him drink one New Year's Eve. We did it. Okay, so understand if it's addiction, it has nothing to do with any of it, okay? We can all look at the way we've handled every situation. It could have nothing to do with addiction and say, I wish I would have done that better. I know I could do that. I wish my superpower was I had a rewind button. And I would go back and I would do this different and I would do that different. But you got to understand where addiction's concerned, that has nothing to do with the present time of what's happening and whether or not you should say no in today's circumstance. You guys get that? You're allowed to think whatever you want about how you parented, or what kind of wife or what kind of husband you were, or brother or sister. That's fine, but it has nothing to do with what you should say today, because it has taken on a different life. Do you guys get this? And I'm going to show you what happens. Literally, the brain has changed. And so it's not about any of that. And you have to, the D stands for dispute. You have to literally argue with yourself. I don't necessarily suggest you talk out loud, but you can. If you do, try to make sure that the right people, are there. Make sure you're not doing it in the wrong setting. But you're literally going to argue with yourself and talk yourself through that. That's not what's happening right now. This has nothing to do with what I did wrong or what I did right. This has to do with the fact that I really shouldn't let her take our car. She was drinking last night. You guys get it? All right, so that's one. And the second one is fear. Fear, very, very common. Probably more common than guilt. And the scenario is usually something along the lines, and it can be, and this happens with husbands to wives, definitely, and wives to husbands. I don't want to make them mad because what? They're going to go get high to deal with it, or they're going to run away and I'm never going to see them. And they're going to be living down the street at Johnny's on the couch, and Johnny sells drugs. You guys know do you all know the rabbit trail? You know what I'm talking about? The worry trail? How your mind just starts going and it's boom, it's over here, it's over here, it's over here. So the fear will also keep people from acting. It'll keep you from acting. And the story that you tell yourself there is if I say this is going to get worse, and he's going to go out and he's going to use and he's going to die. The argument you want to have with yourself is he's already using. Do you get it? And it's not, and again, I'm going to show you the picture of the brain. When we reach the point of addiction, it has nothing to do with whether we're having a good day or a bad day. Here's a fact. Just as many people will relapse because of positive emotions as negative emotions. That is a fact. The research has been done around this. There's not a lot that we know for sure about addiction because it's never really been studied, but one area we know for sure, there's a lot of work around, why does a person relapse? And positive emotions are just as powerful as negative. Positive are, I got promoted, I feel good, you know what would make this even better? Negative is what? This sucks, I can't believe it, I can't believe mom did that, you know what would make this okay? Do you got it? So don't, you gotta, and this is where you gotta literally redirect yourself, and almost some people will write it down, but you want to fight with yourself on those. And there could be other things that come up. It's just guilt and fear are some of the most common kind of things. And this is if you've identified some changes you want to make. Do you guys follow me? Let's pretend that you've identified some things that you need to change in your relationship with the person who's struggling, but you just haven't been able to follow through on it. You start to ask yourself, why can't I do that? What is up here? What's the deal? So my wife, it's interesting, man. Like whenever I was doing my thing, it was years. And me being in active addiction was not good for our situation. I was the breadwinner. I made more money then than I make now. I was very, very successful. And, we had the house, we had the cars, you get where I'm coming from? And so, in her mind, like me being in addiction was like literally like, it threatened her survival, and it threatened her kids' survival. Because if you really get to the chase with moms, man, it's about like what's going on with the kids. Like, have you ever, like, if you step between a female grizzly bear and her cub, she's going to eat your face. And that's kind of like that was sort of the vibe, right? And it was interesting. The thing that kept my wife from making a move was the financial handcuffs, not fear around my death. When I got into recovery, she was more than happy to tell me, well, I used to think, like, if he died, okay, whatever. Because she had gotten there. Because I did all the stuff that you do. I'm not angry with her about this. Like, she never once in our marriage did she call and say, hey, I'll be home at 7. I got to go out with the guys. We're having happy hour, and then not come in until Sunday. Not once. Do you follow me? And I did that on a semi-regular occurrence. And so, but everybody's barrier is different. I'm giving you the two most common, fear and guilt. But your barrier might have very, very tangible things. Either way, you're going to have to identify a way to fight through it. There's a reason why you haven't made some of these changes that might be gnawing at you, and it's not because you're dumb. It's because emotion is involved. And I'm also not telling you to go change anything tonight. Do you guys get this? Don't react to this by leaving and saying, I got to throw the hammer down. That's not what you want to do. You want to start reflecting on this stuff and start asking yourself these questions. You guys get that? And I'm really painting with a broad brush too. Everybody's individual in here. Everybody's situation is very individualized. Would anyone want to talk about that or share anything about that or process anything related to that type of situation? And if not, that's fine. But feel free to kind of like... All right. The next thing related to boundaries. So the first is I got these crazy things going through my mind. The next thing is being really, really sure on what your target is and what it is that you want to talk to the person about and what your expectations are. What happens is sometimes people get frustrated and they get into these conversations with their loved ones and they wind up saying something like, you need help. Or if you don't do something different, I'm going to have to do something about this. You got to get back in recovery. It's not tangible, guys. It's not clear to us. When we're not, for us, recovery might be talking to the dope man about whether or not he wants me to pick him up a circular saw from Home Depot or a chainsaw. That's a joke. Now, they'll only get that in a recovery room, right? Stealing from Home Depot is one of the ways you kind of like support your habit. At least it used to be back in the day. It probably isn't anymore. Holy cow, I've been out of the game for so long. Probably don't do that anymore. Probably do some kind of really sophisticated internet scam these days. But you get where I'm coming from? So what does recovery mean? What are you comfortable with? What do you need to see for this relationship to stay the way it is right now? Do you need to see them to go back to meetings? Is it so bad that now, like, look, we got to get you in rehab or nothing? Do you guys get where I'm coming from? What is, and this is where the program here, Favor Anderson, can really help. This is where the coaches have a lot of experience with themselves going through this, and they can talk you through options with that. So the weeks that I'm not here, one of the things that we hope has happened is you follow up with these questions and you say, like, here's what we're dealing with, and they help guide you through that process so that you can have a real clear conversation. And the phrase that we use is mean what you say what you mean, but don't say it mean. Okay? So what I'm talking about right now is the mean what you say part. Be clear in your mind around what the target is. Okay? And then the second part of that, so do we have that? Like, so, let's just pretend that what it is you got a loved one and maybe they've kind of moved back home or whatever the circumstances is, or maybe you're helping them out financially a little bit, or you have some kind of connection and leverage. There's something going on there. But they're using it, and it's dangerous, and you're worried, and you're going to kind of go into the situation. You would love to see them go to rehab. So you're going to go in your mind, you're going to specifically talk about, hey, this is out of control. We need to get you back in detox. That's an example of very specific. However, we recommend that you are willing to negotiate. Okay? That you go in and you want to sell the car for $50,000, but maybe you're only going to get $25,000. So if you go into that situation, and again, the individual circumstances are very, very important. You may have tried this already. You may have tried other things. But if you go into that situation and are not willing to do a rehab or something, maybe they go back to meetings, or maybe they come here and they get an accountability partner through a coach and they start attending all recovery. I don't know. I'm just telling you that you might want to leave that on the table. I do that. I do that. I do that with my own kids, and I do that with the clients that I work with. Unless it's just so super obvious that you have nothing other than we got to get you back. You're going to say to yourself, well, how do we know? That's where you got to lean on the coaches. But I will tell you that if I go into any conversation with anyone, I don't care who it is or how bad it is, if I can't get them to go to rehab, I will be like, can you come to favor meetings? Understand something, only about 13% of people who are in recovery report going to rehab. Rehab is really not the typical route for recovery. It's the most common route to get somebody stabilized. It's the most popular route. It's the most kind of like mainstream route. But if you can get the person moving forward in any type of recovery and they can start to sustain it, the odds really start to improve for the person's long-term outcomes. If a person keeps coming back, it's about 70% get recovery. But 9 out of 10 people quit going. Do you guys get that? And think about I don't know how many people in here have ever experienced their loved one going to a treatment center. How many came out and never did anything after they came out? You know, only about 20% of people who go to a detox do anything when they leave. So there's so much value in getting them connected with like recovery and people in recovery and people who will text them and say hi and see what's up. So you can negotiate, guys. And when it comes to negotiation, I started to talk about this last week. So last week I was doing my broadcast on Facebook, and it all of a sudden went blank, like literally out of nowhere. I was just standing here and went boom, it went off. I'm convinced it's Purdue Pharma. Purdue Pharma, the pharmaceutical company that launched this whole opioid epidemic. Because I talk a lot of junk on them, I'm convinced they're following me and they're shutting down my broadcast. So I'm in an undisclosed location tonight. They don't know where we are. But I was talking about this because this guy, Christopher Voss, he was, for like 25 years, he was the chief negotiator for the FBI in terms of hostage negotiation. All right? If anybody, any American was kidnapped anywhere, he was responsible for their release. So you can imagine that this dude knew his way around tense situations. And the people that were kidnapping folks were typically not, the kindest people in the world. Terrorists, that kind of stuff. So this guy knows how to work with like very, very hostile people. And I heard him speak and I was listening to him. And he wasn't talking anything to do with addiction. But I thought to myself, if this guy can figure out a way to talk to Osama bin Laden, maybe we can borrow some of these principles to talk to our own loved ones when they're in the middle of the craziness. Does that make sense? All right, so here's some advice around the conversation. This is some advice. Be clear between you and whoever else is going to be in the conversation whether or not you're willing to negotiate before you go in. Know in your mind on whether or not you're going to take anything. Just what I was just talking about. And know that, he recommends negotiation all the time. He recommends giving in on certain things. He recommends almost feeling like you're an ally to the person. Now, obviously, that's hard whenever you've dealt with this, and you may not be able to do anything. It may be all about the other person. But negotiation is the first point. The second point is pick and choose your times to have this conversation. Do not have this conversation when you've just heard bad news. The brain functions 31% better in a positive environment. You guys get that? So, what do I mean by better? More creative, more open, more willing to listen if it's positive in the room. It's typically not positive in the room where addiction's concerned, right? So weight and timing. Timing is everything. Don't have, if they come home drunk tonight, don't have it right while they're, or even maybe the next morning. You've heard the saying, like, catch them when they have a hangover. Don't catch them when they have a hangover. Catch them one of the ideas would be, maybe you're not having a lot of contact with your loved one. Maybe it's already hit the fan. Maybe you start having like lunch once a week. And it has nothing to do with anything other than lunch. And those are the places where you start talking about this. Do you guys follow the vibe here? Hey, there are people who would stand up here in front of you and say, you got to practice tough love and cut them off and wait till they hit bottom. You'll just never hear that from me. And if you hear from somebody who works at Favor, they won't work at Favor anymore. I don't believe it. It's never been studied. It's not true. There is no utility in allowing a person's disease to get worse. But also, you have to protect yourself. Do you follow this? So the idea isn't like, should I step off and let them hit bottom? The idea is, how can I stay connected in a way that's not destroying me? But there is just absolute zero validity in that concept. And so, just have lunch. Talk about lunch. Think about what that would be like if you went out with your loved one. You're like, can we get lunch? And they're going to be like, this is an intervention. I know it is. Right? And no, it's just lunch. You're focusing on, and again, what do you maybe be able to do then? Chip away at it, chip away at it, chip away at it, chip away at it. Over time. That kind of thing. And again, think it through and do it your own way. Think of it as a win-win. You're not trying to make the person do anything. You're trying to help this person's life get a little bit better. You're trying to move the needle on recovery. You guys get that? I'm going to talk now about what is addiction and why is this so difficult. And I want to right off the bat tell you that there's a lot of work being done around addiction, and there's no one-size-fits-all type of addiction. It just isn't true. That's not how it works. There are a lot of things that come into play, things like co-occurring disorders, things like trauma, things like certain folks are born more impulsive than others. Certain folks are born with literally less dopamine in their brain than others. And so I'm going to tell you stuff tonight, but it's not as if I can sit here and say that this is exactly what your loved one is dealing with. It's like everybody is unique. They have their own unique personality and their own, and if you've ever had more than one kid, you know that to be the case. You know people are wired different, almost from the jump. My son Aiden, the one who almost died, so there's this, well, as you know, if you live here in South Carolina, it's rained like 175 days, right? Like, since when did this become Seattle, Washington? So the yard, it just has mud everywhere, right? And, Aiden is just obsessed with this freaking mud. And everything that you can do bad with mud, he does. Okay? And everything that you can do potentially dangerous with mud, he does. And everything you can do dangerous with mud and a bike, he does. What is going on there? Whereas my other kids, they get in it and like, get out. Okay, I'll get out. What is it about Aiden? It's like, I'm going to go back and get more. You guys follow me? It isn't anything to do with parenting. It has nothing to do with anything else. This kid is wired like me. And that's uncomfortable, and that's dangerous, and that's scary, but that's just the truth. And that just has nothing to do with it other than blue eyes, brown eyes, left hand, right hand. You guys get that? So it's all part of the process. And everybody, depending on what they're dealing with, we all kind of come to the table with our own, it's called recovery capital. We all bring strengths to the table. We all bring weaknesses. And here's the other issue. People will show up at recovery and you're not 100% sure what you're dealing with because it's not like a broken leg. You don't have an x-ray of anything. And this graphic here is out of Columbia University, and what you see in the orange there is risky use. These are folks that are using at a level where they're doing dangerous things. And bad things could happen. That's about 32% of Americans. That's a lot of people. Think of your average college campus on a Friday night. Now, the problem is there's a lot of folks in that group that aren't actually addicted. Do you get that? And so that 15% is, I'm about to show you stuff about the 15%, about the brain change, but everybody wants to be in the orange, right? Like whenever I come in to see my counselor or I come in to see my coach or Greg sponsor me or something, I'm like, dude, I'm in the orange, man. I'm good to go. I could put it down at any time. So what do? We are overly cautious. When in doubt, we want to treat you like, and that's how medicine works, guys, right? I mean, think about, you go to the doctor and they send you for 75 different tests. So this is the reality where addiction is concerned. And we also know it feeds into this issue of denial, and I don't have the problem. So you can't really ever tell for sure what the deal is. This is as close as you get. This is through a thing called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the 5th edition, and this is what we use to diagnose any mental health issue or any substance use issue. You sit down and talk to the person, and you look for these criteria. And some of these you'll know about your loved one. You'll literally know just because you know what they're up to. Tolerance means you have to take more and more of the substance to get the same effect. It just isn't working. Maybe you were taking 2 pills a day, now you're taking 7. Or maybe you were drinking a 6-pack and now you're drinking a case. Just more and more to get the same effect. Withdrawal is when you don't have the substance, you're sick. You're sick. You feel flu-like symptoms or you have other symptoms. And when you put the substance in your body, it goes away. That's withdrawal. Now the first two, guys, you can have the first two where like opioids are concerned. Let's just talk about opioids for a minute. You can have the first 2 criteria and not have the other criteria. Those are physical symptoms. Do you guys get that? Those are the physical symptoms associated with this issue. It could happen to anybody. This is why you hear people talk about, we're going to make prescriptions be 3 days long or 7 days long. They're talking about that stuff. The rest of the stuff is behavioral, and that's kind of when you actually get into the difference. Craving, you think about it all day. I don't know if anybody here has ever had a craving for anything, like an Oreo. I had a craving last night for an Oreo. You know, and if I eat one Oreo, I'll eat the whole freaking pack, man. Just disgusting. Chugging milk. The good old days, right? Can't control. Can't control is I went out, I was going to have a couple drinks, and I wound up drinking all night. It was what I described earlier when I said I can't, come back on Sunday. Can't cut back. I can't follow my own rules. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, but I push it. Interpersonal problems. Everyone's mad at me. My girlfriend's mad. My husband's mad. Everybody's upset with me about the issue. Avoid non-using activities. You only go to the party. Great deal of time spent. It's a full-time job. Use despite physical and psychological dangers. That would be a really good example. There would be let's pretend you were told by the doctor you have elevated liver enzymes and you keep drinking. In today's world, if you're using heroin or any street opioid, you automatically meet that criteria because of fentanyl. And you're really going to be able to put methamphetamine on that list too. People need to understand that fentanyl, we have an emergency room response program where if there's an overdose, we go in and we meet the person at Greenville Memorial. And it's starting to show up in cocaine and methamphetamine now too. It seems to be the game plan for the drug cartels is just to put fentanyl in everything because it's so addictive. That's the idea. Use in physically hazardous situations, drinking and driving would be an example of that. And role failure. You don't go to work, you don't go to school. If you have a pattern of 6 or more of those in any given 12 months, you meet criteria. If you're like me, it's the first thing you ever got a perfect score on. Right? And a lot of times, I'll be honest with you, when the folks come to favor, they literally are getting a perfect score. But the problem is they look at it and they explain it away. And they tell you and they tell you things that for them are really, really true. They say things like, I'm not even half as bad as half the people I hang out with. Well, that's probably true because they're very selective with who they're hanging out with. You can't argue with them about it, but this is as clear as it gets, guys. This is just and this is part of the problem. If there was any one thing that could happen in terms of my job, it would be like some type of blood test or biomarker that would be like, you got it. You got it. But I fear even then, the person would be like, test me again, test me again, test me again, test me again. They would bring in like fake blood or something, Clearly, this is part of the difficulty. Part of the difficulty. Now, we do have a lot of people, we probably have more people who recognize they have a problem, but they still don't want to change yet. Even though they know they have a problem, they're still like, not yet, I'll get there. The number one indicator of whether or not you develop an issue is age of first use. So the average age, if you talk to people in treatment centers, when they started using regularly is around 13 or 14. The brain's not developed yet, and you start flooding your brain with these substances. So that's the number one predictor. The second are hereditary factors. There's a connection there as well. It's about 40 to 60% more likely if it's in your family. The strongest connection is father to son, that kind of thing. So my dad dealt with this, his dad dealt with it. So you see where I'm coming from? So I had to desperately get this out of my family. I have 4 sons, and so I don't need to be like passing that on. The type of drug has something to do with it. Not all drugs are as addictive. The most addictive drug is heroin, just straight stats wise. But still, the majority of people who use heroin don't become addicted. Only about 28% do. All right? So you start digging down into this, you start to realize kind of there's more to it than what we've been told. One of the things that I want to like show you guys and talk through, because it really helps you understand the desperation of what happens. So dopamine is this neurotransmitter that we all have in our brains. You guys have it, I have it, it's all there. And what it allows us to do is feel content. It allows us to feel pleasure. It allows us to feel okay. It allows us to have fun. If you are at a party and you're having a good time, and with or without alcohol, you're laughing, you're carrying on, that's because dopamine is being released. If you're really hungry and you get some food, dopamine is released. It tells your brain, go do that again. And that's really important in terms of survival. It's housed in the midbrain. It's housed in the same part of the brain that tells us to eat, drink, reproduce. You guys get that? It's instinctual in nature. So some folks are just literally born with less dopamine receptors. They don't feel things the way the rest of the world feels them. And it's also associated with ADHD. This tends to be the kids like Aiden I was just describing, like me, just like, gotta do something. I don't know if you've ever known anybody like that. My goodness, can't you sit still? No, I gotta do something. And they seek thrills and they do things, and they're usually obsessive in a lot of different areas. Some of the areas are very, very positive. Sometimes not so much. But basically you're running around, and if this is normal and you're at an 8, you want to do something about that. You know you're not feeling it. Well, you find some guys in the neighborhood and they give you some beers. And that takes you to a 15, and all of a sudden the world goes from black and white to color. And you're like, ooh, I like this, right? More than the kid who was already at a 10. You follow me? Now the other side of this is somebody who's dealing with depression. You could also do this for depression. Picture somebody who's at depression and uses something and pops up above baseline. When you're walking around like that and you discover this stuff all of a sudden, now you start repetitively doing it. You start repetitively putting this in your body, and what happens is, this is dangerous to go from 8 to 15. This is too much dopamine. The brain is a self-regulating organ. So what it does is it turns down the dopamine. So now when you don't have the substance, you're walking around at a 6 rather than an 8. Follow? But you still have a solution. Now understand, this is happening over time. This isn't like one-time use. You still have a solution though, because you know where to find this stuff. But maybe you need to get something a little heavier though. But you go and you still pop. You're at a 12. But you still have added too much to your brain, and your brain self-regulates. It backs it off a little bit more. Now you're walking around at a 2. Now it's getting kind of ugly, because you're just pretty miserable now. This isn't even about a party anymore. Now you go get the substance, and you can only get to a 4. And then what you see for the rest of that chart is the person is trying to use to feel normal, not feel high. And you hear it all the time. The party was over. It had nothing to do with like I'm having a good time. It was, and you don't know this, right? You're sort of running around. You're doing your thing. Your brain is literally. It looks like this. Well, first, let's go through what dopamine. Why I mean it's so dangerous. This is the amount of dopamine that's released. So let's pretend 100% is just the regular amount of dopamine in your brain. If you eat food, it releases 50% more. If you play video games, it takes it 75% more. Look at amphetamine and methamphetamine. Amphetamine and methamphetamine increase the amount of dopamine in the brain by 900% and 1,200%. That's dangerous. That's dangerous. And now all other substances do that, guys. This is just a chart. And then what eventually happens is this. On the right is your brain after you've been depleted of dopamine. So you're pouring this into an empty bucket. And you're walking around and you never feel okay. You never feel okay, and you're obsessed, and all you can do is think about it. and you do it and you feel guilt and you feel remorse and you feel horrible about yourself and you know you suck and you go to bed and you say, I'm not going to do it again tomorrow. And then you wake up and that happens. And that's what's going on. And then you know what? You go and you steal the pills anyway. Or you go and you take the chance anyway. Or you go and you get in the car with your kids and you drive into the back of another car anyway. Do you follow me? At no point in time did I ever say, did I ever even think, what's this going to do to my family? Do you follow me? It was instinctual. It was desperate. It was automatic pilot. It was automatic pilot. That's the difference between heavy partying and addiction. Now, camp out here to see if you have any questions. That is the fundamental difference. Don't get me wrong, you can die if you're partying heavy too. Are we clear on that? I'm not at all saying that's okay. But I know people that I was in college with that were worse than I ever was. And they just quit one day. Their brain didn't do that. Not everyone's brain will shut off the dopamine. It's no different than like diabetes type 2. So think about diabetes type 2. Diabetes type 2, you give it to yourself. So you do your thing and you put stuff in your body that you shouldn't, right? You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be doing that. You're not eating right. Over time, the pancreas shuts off the production of insulin and you experience symptoms. Wounds that won't heal, blurred vision. We can all agree with that, right? Diabetes 2, you gave it to yourself. Addiction, you put stuff in your body that you shouldn't. People tell you not to. You keep doing it anyway. And over time, the brain stops producing dopamine. It is identical. It is an identical lifestyle disease. Diabetes doesn't come with some of the drama. I get it. Diabetics don't necessarily act the same way as people in active addiction. But it is 100% a chronic disease. And this doesn't mean that you give the person an excuse for their behavior. It doesn't mean that it's okay for us to do the things we did in active addiction. But understand that that's what you're dealing with. Do you guys get it? Like, that's what you're dealing with. And tell yourself, look, I did insane things, guys. And my mom had to deal with it. And this is actually probably better. My mom dealt with it back in the day whenever I left on a Friday. There was nothing she could do. There was no, I have a tracker on my phone for my kids. Okay? When I left the house, my mom could only pray. You guys get it? Like, it was like, is he alive? Is he dead? Every freaking weekend. I loved my mom more than anything. The whole entire time. Do you guys get that? My feelings for my mom never shifted at all. I loved her as much in the middle of my addiction as I did before my addiction. I had no idea this was going on, though. Okay? It wasn't until I got some education I started to do some things. And so what do we want you to do with this information? We don't want you to make excuses. We don't want you to go home and buy your loved one a house to live in tonight. That's not what we're doing. But we want you to keep it in mind so you know exactly where the conversation is going to go, and the next day when they repeat the behavior, understand what's happening. Understand what's happening. Now here's the good news. It gets better as time goes by. You can see this is this reference is just kind of like a normal healthy brain. If you go progressively to the left, what you see is 100 days without the substance. You start to come back online. That's the good news. It's not a permanent condition. Okay? It comes back. And it comes back differently in different ways for different people. That's the fundamental stuff of substance use disorder. Now, any questions about that process or anything that I can clear up? Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Long-term use of what started with Klonopin and Xanax, and I'm talking over 10 years.
Yeah.
And does that come back?
Yeah, that comes back. The problem with the benzodiazepines is it's really problematic from a systems point of view because, quite frankly, it's mismanaged. There's a long-term withdrawal syndrome around benzos. Benzodiazepines, guys, are like Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, Valium, a wide variety of drugs. And the deal is that typically a person will get thrust into a rehab or into a detox situation and be kind of detox 6 or 7 days. And you can't do that with long-term benzodiazepine use.
4 different detoxes.
That's what's going on. It's not long enough. Now you can find, if you have the money to afford like a long-term residential treatment center, I don't have that type of money, but you could find a place where a person would go and they would keep them, and they would keep them under lock and key so they could get through that. But ideally what a person has is a really long-term taper. A lot of times people have to do the benzo stuff in the community, but then it's hard. I found out tonight y'all got like, there's no providers here. That's what these folks told me. Like there's no clinical providers here. There's like behavioral health, but there's no other drug and alcohol clinic in town. I can't even believe it. I literally cannot believe it. This is like, this is not cool. This is not good. You know, who the heck is she going to see that's going to talk her through that? You follow what I'm saying?
She's already told us everything you've talked about. She'll tell us.
Yeah.
But no, I need this. I have to have it.
So,
Just a little bit.
yeah,
But we know it's a lot more than a little bit.
that's typically the problem. If it was
Like
just
half a Xanax.
if it was just a little bit or a half, then it would almost be a non-issue. Y'all wouldn't probably even be sitting here. It'd be like, because a person can function, they will get on. But the problem is if her brain shifted, it'll never only be that. Do you follow me? Because it's an empty bucket, so you're constantly chasing that feeling. Do you guys get that? It's real important to understand it. If your brain is like this, it's never going to be about a little bit.
The reason why they do the drug is so your brain has more dopamine.
Yeah, you're
I
trying.
mean, with all the drugs, they don't have a drug that produces dopamine.
Well, that's the problem. The drugs that produce dopamine get you high. You follow that? You know that's where they haven't figured out anything that doesn't affect that, like that little euphoric bump, and they haven't perfected anything that doesn't seem to like cycle it into going after more. I believe that these solutions will be found. I think that your statement is 100% true. I will tell you what some people do is there are supplements and there's different things you can do. It's hard though because you first have to get to a baseline and kind of get off the substance to sort of figure out where you are and kind of like reset things. So can I just use this as an example because it's just a good example. Like again, everything is individualized and the circumstances around what your loved one is dealing with is going to be like so varied. That's a very specific circumstance you're talking about there. And this is where, can she get involved with anything? Because what I believe people can start to do is start to figure it out. This is what I actually believe. You know, you can't walk into a detox and get detox for, 90 days off of Klonopin. You just can't. It doesn't exist. But what I've noticed is if they start coming and they talk to recovery coaches, and recovery coaches don't give that type of advice, they don't even know. But they start to figure it out. Literally, the person starts to figure it out over time, and they start to feel better along the way. Because here's a fact, guys. One of the things that raises dopamine is being around other people. One of the biggest ways to raise dopamine is to be around other people. And so what happens when you're at a recovery meeting? You're around other people. What happens if you go to a therapist? You're talking to another human being. What happens, so on and so forth. People, it doesn't count if you're going and get, like the dope man doesn't count in that list. You guys follow me? That's not what I mean technically that's a person and they're probably addicted too. We would love to help them, but that's not what I mean. Positive people can help. And that's why when I was talking about negotiation, that may be part of the strategy. Can you do anything? What can get the person involved? Do you guys follow that? Because there is no ideal solution, and you may be dealing with that overall. Most people require multiple efforts at recovery. Now, a couple other things I wanted to talk about real quick is also like the mental health stuff, right? So you got like a dopamine issue, but we also have to acknowledge that anxiety and depression, depending on whether it's legit or not, people report it's there. You guys follow? Like this, she had to report anxiety to somebody, right?
Oh,
yeah, So, and think about what that's like to be the psychiatrist on the other end or the doctor. I mean, I used to go to the doctor and get these opioids hand over fist. I never had a doctor like tell me no. You would have think that like, hey, he could have at least said like, they stole them out of your car again? Dude, you might want to move to a new neighborhood. Or, but I would go in and I would say I had a neck injury and he couldn't prove it wrong or prove it right because I did have a documented neck injury. That's the same thing that happens with anxiety. And the other thing that we do is we literally create the phantom condition. Okay? I'm telling you, this is one of the most amazing things ever. This is like one of the most amazing freaking things I've ever experienced in my life. But the day I got into recovery, I haven't had any pain in my neck. But if you would have talked to me then, I mean, I as true as I'm standing here, I was in excruciating pain. I had psychologically created that so that when I went, I had the actual symptoms that I could get what I wanted. I'll tell you how it's also evident, guys. 80% of workers' comp claims in the state of South Carolina also involve an addiction to opioids. Because what's happening is that they can't go back to work because they're creating this pain in their body, and what, they need to keep getting these pills, so their brain has created this phantom pain. The same thing can happen where anxiety is concerned, or even depression and stuff. Now we also have to caution that anxiety and depression are also real. So you can't go home and say, like, this isn't what you're experiencing. What we try to talk to people about is there are other ways to do it. There are other ways to deal with this stuff. And you got to be careful about, I have two different doors here, just the way that I conceptualize it. Like, are they actually getting the help they need for the psychiatric issues? And or does the psychiatrist actually know they have an addiction issue? Because they typically have them separated. And they're not working together. So how do you kind of resolve that? And if you don't have a lot of services here in the area, that's going to be really, really tough. So one of the things right off the jump, where's Lee? So one of the things right off the jump, this is my first time here, we will 100% have to run workshops for people in recovery here. Because they're not getting it anywhere else. Do you follow me? We're going to have to run workshops where we're educating people on these type of issues where, because they don't have any other options. In Greenville, you have 130 therapists you can send people to. And there's things that go wrong there too, don't get me wrong. But somehow, how do you get your loved one to start understanding this? You guys can't field that conversation. That's a really hard conversation. It's going to wind up, you're her mom, you're not her therapist. It's not your job. You should bill her then.
Oh, the bill is big.
The bill is big. Yep. All right, so I want to talk about a couple other things. So first of all, everything I just talked about is you understanding exactly what you're dealing with and the complexity of that and trying to start to wrap your mind around it and how to approach it and really where's my loved one at in this process. The next part I want to talk about, how do you take care of yourself a little bit and deal with stress and deal with anxiety and give you some suggestions around that part of the equation too. Because we know that this will take you out as well. Actually, I should rephrase that. I don't know if you know this, but this will take you out as well. And what do I mean by that? There are about 75 healthcare conditions that are directly related to chronic stress, toxic stress, ranging from heart disease to cancer, guys. So managing your own experience with this is also very, very important. This is universal, though. This is universal on if you were dealing with any kind of healthcare issue, or even if you were dealing with like financial concerns, anything that creates stress. So I'm going to we do it from this angle of positive psychology, and people do different things different ways. Positive psychology is an approach where we're looking at, like, we're not looking at trying to diagnose anybody with anybody. We're trying to give people like researched, proven techniques that improve your mood and reduce stress on any given day. And so this was developed in like '93. And this is stuff all across the world that they've studied this stuff. These are universal human experiences. And so a couple different things to tap into. The free 3. You can start this tomorrow. Do it for 30 days and see if you feel any reduction in stress. Go outside, laugh, and listen to music every day. Okay? You don't have to go hiking in the woods. You can walk out around the building. There's no cost to it. It's been researched. Literally, people report lower subjective units of distress through this process. And it's easy to see why, right? You feel better when you laugh. I suggest the music you listen to is like real upbeat, positive, you know? I'm into like East Coast gangster rap, but hey, whatever you're into. You know, and some folks would say I do that. This is real important what I'm about to say. People say, well, we do that already. No, don't think of it that way. Intentionally assign it to yourself every day. Maybe at the end of the day, have an accountability partner, or maybe at the end of the day, in your calendar or your phone or something, you're checking a box. I don't know. It has to be more than we already do that, because you probably don't. You probably don't. And if you make it intentional, literally your brain is now associating this with an effort to feel better. Do you follow what I'm saying? There's like this connection, this neural pathway connection around, hey, I'm walking around the building, I'm going for a walk today. Or I'm going to... Now, you can access these items anywhere. I mean, what? You can pull out a YouTube video. I don't know. Watch cats, watch cats that do funny things videos. Or whatever else you're into. Watch a movie. That kind of thing. But make yourself do it. Make yourself follow those expectations. Finding meaning out of suffering. And this is really important. We run a grief group at Favor, and it's called Grasp. And Lisa Mincy is our point person for that. She lost her son to this disease. And one of the hardest things about life is, if there's a God, why do bad things happen? Type stuff, right? Why am I going through this? Why does suffering happen? And really taking a moment to wrap your mind around that, and maybe reading some stuff about that, or getting back into your faith, or whatever it might be. These are very difficult things to deal with, guys, and I want to let you know that I know. I don't know theoretically. I went through it. Okay, I know, even as a professional, right, how hard this is. So one of the things is, how do I make sense of it, and how do I find meaning in all this craziness that's going down? A couple ideas or a couple concepts. Understand something, that whenever you get into this addiction cycle with your loved one and you're dealing with it, you're going to feel like you're on an island, because you're dealing with a relatively unique situation, and it's going to get really easy to kind of like look outwardly and think that other people maybe don't have stuff like this going on. Their kids, I don't know, you're going to go on Facebook and you're going to see that this kid was just named president of the Harvard Chinese Checker League, right? And so graduated with a, I don't know how you can get more than a 4.0 now. Like back in the day, you couldn't get more than a 4.0, but that's just a way to make kids artificially feel good about themselves. I can't believe I said that out loud. So at any rate, don't look outward, guys. Don't look outward, and understand that the things that you're seeing, you're not actually seeing what's going on in there. Do you guys get that? One of the advantages of being a therapist is I get to talk to people from all kinds of different walks of life. A perk is I actually realize that every single person on this planet is carrying a hefty cross. And it might not be addiction. I'll be honest, it could be something worse. It could be terminal illness, depression in the family, all kinds of other things. You get where I'm coming from? But understand, you're going to have to make yourself get in touch with this, because the world does not do that. The world tells you you're the only one screwed up. How? TV commercials, the perception we have because we all put the polish on. Facebook, guys, Facebook isn't real. Okay? That polished up picture, literally like 30 seconds earlier, they were trying to kill each other. Okay? So, that's not real. That's not what's going on. That's not how it works. You really like the TV stuff and the kind of like stereotypical stuff that's out there is literally designed to make you feel bad about yourself so you go buy something. The best example is 2 years ago, Lexus had this Christmas commercial out, okay? And so this Christmas commercial, it's like this absolutely beautifully stunning, perfect woman, okay? Now I'm assuming it's Christmas morning. And I'm not sure what your house is like on Christmas morning, but we're not all polished up. You get where I'm coming from? But this woman is. She must really be doing it right. So she's perfect. And then here comes her perfect husband. Walking in. Yeah. He's also perfect. Then comes the perfect daughter. And she goes out and runs around the Lexus. And I look around my house, and I got 2 kids over here trying to kill each other. I got one up here trying to jump off the steps. Somebody's over here throwing up. There's dog poop on the floor. But I suck. right? I suck. Oh, I'll go buy a Lexus, and that'll make me feel a little bit better about myself. Understand what I just told you is 100% true, and it's 100% how our economy works. They make us buy things we don't actually need. How many people only have things you need? What do we need a place to live. We need food to eat tonight. We probably need to be inside a shelter, that kind of thing. All right, let's get a TV. We'll watch a TV, that kind of thing. It literally doesn't work unless they make you buy stuff you don't need. Now, I'm not lamenting that. I'm not saying it shouldn't be that way, but I want you to be aware of that, because when you're dealing with something like addiction, perspective taking is so important. Because you got real deal stuff on your plate to worry about, guys. Like, you have stuff that you should be stressed out about. You don't need to create perceived stress. Do you get that? You don't need to create perceived stress. So, and trying to make sense of that, and getting back and talking to people about that, and really finding good, solid people who are going to be honest about their experiences and lift you up rather than kind of bring you down around finding meaning. And understand that this is a time to be selective, and if you have people in your life who don't lift you up, this is a time to distance yourself from them. You can go back to those relationships after things start to settle down a little bit. You guys get it? Because you're cranked. The other part of it is the what's my purpose type stuff. Why am I here? Can I learn anything from this? Is there a greater lesson? Can I help other people around this? One of the ideas would be that folks in groups like these would start to become spokesmen for the group and let people know that the group is here, and be willing to say something about it, because it's not natural to say something. This is one of those things we don't want to talk about, but you start to get into this idea that I can be part of the solution, and I'm going to try to help. And the payoff for you is it goes beyond just your experience, and there's a purpose for you. Life is about something more than just us. And we can find a way to make meaning and have a quality of life no matter what the circumstances are. There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning that addresses it. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist, okay, and he was in, it wasn't Auschwitz, but he was in one of the most notorious concentration camps during World War II. And while he was there, what he noticed was that in terms of survival, there were different groups of people, and it was very clear who survived. And the people who survived, they had realistic optimism. There were 3 or 4 different types of groups. One group there was this group that was in tight with the guards. Now, instinctually, you would think that group would survive because they got extra food, they didn't have to do the really hard work, they never got chosen for the gas chambers. That group died first. The second group that died was the group that said, this is terrible, this is horrible, this is awful, I can't believe this has happened. That group died second. The third group that died was the group that was unrealistically optimistic. They would tell themselves, we're going to be out of here by Christmas. We're going to be out of here by Christmas. We're going to be out of here by Christmas. And what happened there? They had broken hearts, right? The group that survived did 2 things. They had this thing called realistic, or what's called tragic optimism, which is, yeah, this is terrible. This is horrible. But I'm going to allow myself the possibility that this could get better, and that I can do things to help make this better. Do you follow me? But I'm not going to tell myself that it's solved. The problem when you tell yourself it is solved, and I'll tell you when we see that happen, is when people go to rehab. You'll see the family be so let down when the person comes out and they relapse. That's not what you want to do. Is you want to understand this can get better, and actually there are decent odds. But I'm not going to put the cart before the horse. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to be hopeful, but I'm not going to put the cart before the horse. That's how you want to approach this kind of a situation as you move it forward. And then a couple other pointers real quick. The word awesome gets thrown around. One of the things that they studied when it came to happiness and it came to stress relief was, and it's usually like a nature kind of thing. It doesn't have to be. That's my problem. I can't stand being outside in nature, man. It scares me. I grew up in the city of Pittsburgh. I'm not it's not cool, man. There's sounds, there's bugs, there's things. Okay? So I don't get to see a lot of this, but this would be can you think of places you've gone where you can picture it maybe in your mind right now, and the feeling that you have is a feeling of awe. Stunning natural beauty would be an example, or maybe it was even like some kind of other event that you were at. One of the ways that I get this is like sporting events. If you've ever seen like an awesome sporting event, what that literally does, guys, is it elevates your mood. It takes you to another level of experience. It's really hard to do, though, when you're dealing with this. So one of the assignments we would have is go do it. And when I say that to parents, they're like, what are you talking about? Johnny's in the middle of the... Go to your favorite place and spend a weekend. Or whatever it is, whatever awe-inspiring, and then what's the payoff down the road? What you're trying to do is put wind in your sails. Do you guys get that? You're trying to deposit some money in your own emotional bank so that you can kind of be better about this. And then the last thing I want to talk about was forgiveness. And this is, very, very different for different circumstances. And obviously, if somebody did something horrible to you in their addiction, don't listen to what I'm about to say. If somebody did something horrible to you, do not listen to what I'm about to say. If they hurt you in any kind of way. Do you guys get that? Otherwise, starting tonight, radically forgive your loved one for everything that's happened. That doesn't mean you forget. That doesn't mean you treat them any different. You get where I'm coming from? It doesn't mean you buy them a car so they can get to work. But forgive them. And the resentment that you have in your heart for the behavior is going to get away from rational thinking. Do you get this? This is all about how do I approach this moving forward? What are my strategies? What are my ways? I forgive them. I forgive them because that is taking up too much space in my brain. And that's taking up too much space. I need to get a fresh start. Unless the person, I don't want you to forgive somebody that traumatized you or anything like that. You get that? Like, I don't want you to do that. So here's what you do. You start to work on these things. You start to think about those options that we talked about at the beginning. You start to think about, how do I start to take care of myself? You follow up next week and you come back to this group when it's going to be an open share. And you start talking through this stuff. And maybe you give your phone number to somebody who can coach you through some of these things. The role of a coach is very distinct, guys. They're not going to sit down and try to get all like therapeutic. They're not going to be like, tell me how that makes you feel. You're not allowed, we don't talk like that, Lee, right? Like we're not going to be like, it's going to be, here, tell me what's happening. Okay, here's how we see what your options are. What do you think about it? It's like a consultation would be a more accurate way to think of it. And you can start wrapping your mind around, what moves do I have? You may not have any, but you can start wrapping your mind around. And then the second part would be, start trying some of these exercises. Start trying some of these exercises around taking care of yourself and working through that. This is going to be here anyway. So the idea would be, do something with it. Does that make sense? Try to do something with it. I will be back here the first Monday of every month, and we will do this again. We will do something like this. I'll be broadcasting this from the other location next Monday, if you all want to tune into that or something. I'll probably do some follow-up on some things we talked about tonight. Because typically when I do this, good things get brought up, and there's been a lot of stuff to consider and think about here tonight. Otherwise, it is 8 o'clock. That's all I have. If we can get a moment, guys, we're going to close this thing with the Serenity Prayer. So if I can get a moment of silence for those still suffering with this disease and for the family members brought in this no choice of their own, followed by the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, thanks a lot. You're free to go about the world and be serene.